In today's episode of Doing Shit in the Garage, we're going to be putting a jack flag under the bonnet. So what I've done so far is, if you can see, there's kind of like a little bit of a seam that runs around the edge of the bonnet, and what I've done is I've started to tape off that seam. I've missed that bit because it's a curve, and just taping around that. So I'm going to leave that bit as the actual colour of the car, so that when the bonnet is shut, there's no visible sign that there's the jack flag under there unless you open the bonnet. And what I'm using is this frog tape. I read the back and it seemed to be the best for, you know, keeping them straight lines. So I read all the packaging and all of that. And then what I've done is I've just keyed it with a 400 grit sandpaper, just to make sure that the paint has something decent to adhere to. So this is the state that the bonnet is now in. I've decided that I'm going to remove the bonnet catch, and what I've done is I've reinstalled the bolts, also where the bonnet attaches to the car, just to preserve the threads that are inside of there. I don't know if you can pick it up on camera, but yeah, you definitely can. You can see that there's a bit of striping going on. I've still got another couple of coats of primer to lay down. This is a primer white, because obviously we're going to do a lot of white. And I've gone for 2 500ml white primers. This is how it's looking after all of the coats of white paint have been put on. I've put probably about 1750ml or so. And what I've got is I've left myself half a can of white. And the reason I've done that is so that when I tape up the jack flag, I'm then going to put a coat of white over the top of what's taped, so that if there is any bleed through before I put the red on, that the bleed is white rather than it being red. So hopefully when I peel the tape off, it should be just a nice clean sharp red line. The way that I worked out how to actually tape out the flag was when you use something. So I used the tyre to make my circle, and then I marked the center point of that circle, and then used a protractor to then draw another radius, and then worked out that on the Japanese flag, I think there's 16 beams. So that meant that there was, in a 360 degree circle, 22.5 degrees. So each of these lines represents a 22.5 degree angle going around. And then what I did was I then used a string line from the center point and ran it out and marked it on the edge of the bonnet, then dragged my tape out, cut out what needed to be cut out, which has left us with this. And everything that is white at the moment will be going red, and everything that's taped will be remaining white. See that I've just painted over everything once again with the final bit of white, so that if there is any bleed that's going to go under the tape, hopefully the bleed's going to be white. So I'm going to leave it for 15 minutes and I'm going to start putting on red. This is how it's looking after 2 cans of red paint. And whilst the red is looking pretty strong, what I've noticed is where I've been spraying it kind of flat on, and the bonnet is actually going to be visible like this. So when we see like that, you can actually see that there's still a bit of, it's going to be really difficult. You can see I've tried to get in there, but in the end I used 1500ml of red paint, and for the final coats kind of did them at a downward angle a little bit to try and fill in them holes, and it seems to have worked quite nicely. So yeah, it's pretty wet at the moment, but it's looking nice. Consistency looks pretty even, so hopefully that's gonna dry nicely. So I'm gonna leave it for probably about 2 hours now to harden. This is where I'm at with it now. I didn't film the last bit because it pissed me off, to be honest. But what happened was I hadn't properly pressed down the tape lines, and what that meant was that there was like little bits that had bled, whereas the majority of it I had properly pressed down the tape lines. And you can see, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a sharp red line. So what I've ended up doing is just taping everything that was red over. I'm going to put another can of white on, Another issue that I came into was that even though this was all taped up, the overspray or the spray was getting through the holes that were exposed, that were being painted red, and it was settling inside there. So what I've done is I've stuffed all of those holes that are behind the newspaper with newspaper, and in here I've then taped up in there. I know it's a drift car, but yeah, things are either done right or they're done wrong. So yeah, taped it all up. 100% sure that I pressed everything down. Now I'm gonna lay some dust coats of white on, because it is looking pretty decent already, but obviously I want it to be bang on. So this is how it's looking now that I've redone the white, and what I can say is that the tape does work if it's stuck down properly. There's only a couple of places that could be improved on. I don't know if you can see that. Just a tiny bit of bleed just gone underneath there. But otherwise it's looking pretty alright. There's straight lines. Managed to get the lines to go through in those holes. And because I stuffed all of these with newspaper when I was doing the white this time, all of that stayed red. The overspray's got in there. So yeah, overall I'd say that I'm pretty happy with how it's looking now. So the next step is going to be clear coat. This is how it's looking after all the clear coat has gone on. It's still wet at the moment, so obviously it's got to dry, but it's got about just best part of 3 cans of clear coat on there. Looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. This is how it's looking. I think it's come out pretty decent. What I did was, where the bolts were installed, I just traced around them with you know, kind of Stanley knife type thing, you know, hobbycraft knife, whatever. Traced around with the same hobbycraft knife all the way around where I taped up the edge. So that's a nice clean line now, as you can see. And that's it, completely dry, you know, touch dry, but it looks wet, so I'm pretty happy with that. It's, you know, got a good bit of shine on it. This is the final outcome of all of the effort. I did just spray all of this stuff black. Finished touching up those bolts so that they were black as well. But I think it looks pretty decent. I'm gonna chuck in some cinematics after this.